Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Susan Park. I'm the California Department of Education Charter Schools Division Director, and today we have a very exciting webinar for you that's being recorded. We will have Kimberly Mundank from the AMAR division at CDE. She's an administrator who'll go over the recently released renewal information published on the CDE website, as well as Rick Reyes from the Charter School Division going over the renewal process. Both of these are intended to be general information sessions, and we appreciate you joining us here today. The recording of today's webinar will be posted on the website, and we appreciate all the questions that have come in via email. Kim and Rick are going to do their best to try and respond to the questions within their presentation. But if you have a question that you did not have time to email us or you do not think was addressed today, please feel welcome to email us at charters with an S, CHARTERS at cde.ca.gov. And myself and McKenna will be sure to route the question and respond to you. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Kim, and she will put up her slides. And the slide deck will also be posted on the CDE website. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Susan, for hosting this lovely webinar in the Charter Division. My name is Kimberly Muntank. I'm an administrator with the Accountability Development and Policy Analysis Unit at CDE. And today, what we're going to walk you through is exactly how the California School Dashboard informs the Charter School Performance Category data file. So for some of you, this might be a large learning lesson, and for others of you who are very practiced with the dashboard and all of the indicators since its debut in 2017, the first part of this might be a little old hat. So I hope that today is a learning lesson for everyone, that you all take away something new that could be helpful. And at the end of my section of the presentation today, we'll walk through exactly how those dashboard outcomes inform how the charter school performance category data file is created and moves through. So first off, we'll walk through that and then go through the file. But we're going to start off at the very beginning with really just an overview of AB 1505 and the dashboard and how we walk through and connect everything that our state and federal accountability system, known as the California School Dashboard, works, how you get a color, what those colors mean, what it means when you don't get a color, and then how all of that, again, informs the charter school file. So to begin with, a lot of folks ask, where did the dashboard come from? And you know, when did it come around? Well, I just shared it started in 2017. That's when we first produced the dashboard in the fall of 2017. And since then, we've had a dashboard in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2022, and again in 2023. In the years 2020 and 2021, we had a pause on the dashboard. You can click and find dashboards there, but there were no official state indicator designations for those years. The local control funding formula that was passed in 2013 is what dictated the creation of the dashboard itself, which it was this idea that we would have one system of support throughout the entire state of California that would link and unify both our state accountability system as well as our federal accountability system into one nexus, one reporting system, and it would be unified by the 10 state priorities identified in the local control funding formula. And so the dashboard reflects outcomes for all of those priority areas, either through state indicators. State indicators are published because of their uniformity throughout the data system and the ability for the state to provide information back on those indicators. And then your local indicators, which are those indicators that you submit on an annual basis in following your approval by your local board. And that populates those other priority areas where we don't have data from the state to inform them. So for instance, the climate survey that you administer within your LEAs, that information doesn't get sent to the state at any time. Instead, you provide the outcomes for that in your local accountability plans, as well as within your priority areas when you upload that information. So that is where the priority areas come from, why you're measured on what you're measured on, and which of the indicators are available. Now, I mentioned really briefly about data and where it comes from, but this is probably the largest question we receive. And the answer simply for all of the state indicators on the dashboard is that data comes from you. It comes most in its largest majority within the California Longitudinal Achievement Data System, or CalPADS, and also from the operational data store for CalPADS. These two areas through the end of year reporting are how we receive data from LEAs. This is where you report all of the students who have attended your school throughout the entire year so that we know what your cumulative enrollment was for the year. It's where you report your discipline outcomes, your attendance patterns, and how that information would inform chronic absenteeism. And it allows us to see all of your course data information about students so that we can look and capture that for the college career indicator. This is your main source of information through for the dashboard. And then I've also linked the CalPADS Operational Data Store, or ODS. And that's actually where we receive all of your graduation outcomes. It's a really important section of data because you never hit submit. However, we do capture it on one single day. This year, that date is the day after the end of year reporting closes. So end of year closes on August 16th. So you'll be able to go through, and ODS will close right on that day as well. And all of the information you've uploaded about your graduates, we capture and grab in a snapshot. And if you upload it the next day, we don't see it. But as long as it's in there, we get to receive all of that data. In addition to that large chunk of data that you submit on an annual basis, we also receive information on your annual assessments through our assessment vendors. Specifically, ETS would be the largest one. From ETS, we receive all of your CASP scores, all of your California Alternative Assessment scores, as well as your LPAC information from students and all of the alternative scores there. We also get information for our college career indicator from College Board, for our AP tests, as well as the IB test exams. That's other information we receive directly from the testing vendors. So you don't have to submit that information to us. And then finally, we also have additional student level data submissions. And these are separate and outside of CalPADS, but usually follow the same timeline. At this time, those additional student level data submissions are not utilized within the dashboard. However, it's a great way for us to be able to grab data to see if it is going to be used for the dashboard in the future. For example, currently we just opened up a new additional student level data collection for the State Seal of Civic Engagement. So students that have completed that seal would be able to enter in that data. We'd be able to capture that. And if the state board wants to add that as a qualification for the college career indicator in the future, they'd be able to do so through that additional student level data submission that's not a part of CalPADS. Now, overall, the dashboard measures performance using two concrete ideas. These state measures go through status for current year results, as well as change, which is whether your results on the dashboard have improved from the prior year. It's the combination of these two things, status and change, that equal a performance color. And those performance colors are reported at the school, the local education agency or LEA, and every student group level at the school and LEA. And what that looks like to you and what you are familiar with are 5 performance levels or colors. And these colors had disappeared in 2022, but are back on the dashboard for all of our indicators this year in 2023. For schools, student groups, and LEAs with the lowest performance level, you will see a red displayed on the dashboard, moving up to orange, yellow, green, and blue for the best performance and highest performance in the state. If you notice the logo on my picture, you'll see that the logo for the dashboard actually points to green. And the reason for that is that the statewide goals and our ESSA state plan goals actually all point to a green box on our 5x5. And it's really important to note as a state that that is the overall goal for every single one of our schools, districts, and student groups. That's where we want everyone to get, is to that upper right corner of the 5x5 grid. Now, what is a 5x5 grid, you ask? Well, this is a 5x5 grid. How you actually determine your color is based on that matrix combination of status and change. Status is in the column to the far left. You can see from very low, low, medium, high, and very high. And then changes across the top from decline significantly to increase significantly. And you can see across this matrix of 25 boxes, there are 25 different ways to get a color. There are 4 options to get red, 6 options to get orange, 6 options to get yellow, 5 to get green, and 4 to get blue. Your ability in this 5x5 matrix allows you to show improvement year over year. And that is the gift of the dashboard. Instead of our status that we had in 2022 and our status only dashboard, which only allowed schools and districts to be able to show where they were. The 5x5 table allows you to receive credit for improving year over year. And the idea behind this 5x5 table is that if you are showing improvement at your school site, within your student groups, at your district, you'll be able to move to the far right column. And over time, your status will also increase because you're constantly increasing, and you're going to march up vertically up to those green and blue boxes year over time. So as long as you are maintaining or increasing significantly, as you can see, once you start moving up the boxes, your ability to show an improved color increases, and that side of things go well. If you're moving the opposite direction, though, like you said, if things are declining year over year, you're going to march down the boxes and move over in towards that red corner. And for each of our indicators, they have their own 5x5 tables, their own color grids, and their own cut scores that determine each of these. So it's important to know which of the 5x5 tables you're being measured on for each of those indicators based on your school type and your composition for who is within your indicator. Now, what you see on the dashboard and on a dashboard card are the following things. First off, you're going to see that overall color for your school. And you can see that displayed as orange over here on this example card we see. Additionally, you are going to see the status, and we just talked about that. We talked about status levels, but the overall status on this graduation rate indicator card is 86.4%. At 86.4% of students graduated. That is the status for the school. Then we can see for overall change, a decline of 1%. The additional information at the bottom of the card presented in the equity report presents how your student groups performed on their performance levels overall for student group colors. So in this example, you can see that one student group scored in the red, 9 in the orange, 1 in the yellow, 2 in the green, and 0 in the blue for the graduation rate. These cards are seen on every single school, district, and state page in this large format. When you click through to view more details at the bottom of that large card, you're going to see additional information about how your student groups performed. And on these small cards, you're going to see how schools or LEA student groups performed with their color overall, their student group status, their student group change, as well as the number of students that are included within each of those student groups. So you're going to see those values displayed. You will not see on this page or on the prior one exactly which level you're in. Again, for status levels or change levels. That information is available on our additional reports as well as within our downloadable data files. Instead, here, all you see are status and change. Now, today's presentation, I want to make sure that everyone's very clear about how you earn a color and what you need to have in order to see a color show up. Because as we know within the charter school community, sometimes you have a smaller school population than, let's say, a very large school district that has colors displayed for every single one of its indicators. So there actually is criteria necessary for you to see a color dial show up overall for your indicators and or for your student groups. The most important component of all of this is that you need to have 30 students within your current year and your prior year for each of the indicators in order to see a color. And it's really important to note that each of our indicators has its own denominator. So for instance, if we are talking about 30 students for our academic indicator, we're talking about how many students took the test in grades 3 through 8 and grade 11. You would need to have at least 30 students who are eligible to take the test. If we're talking about graduation rates, that's 30 students who are in your cohort to graduate. So it's not 30 students overall at your school. It's 30 students overall within each of your indicators. If your school is showing no performance color across or gray dials across your dashboard, it's because you do not have 30 students in the current or prior year. And instead of showing you a color, what we show and share is your status, your change. We report your status levels and change levels in our data files. However, you are not held accountable for any support determinations in our state and federal system if you have a gray dial. And additionally, when we get to performance categories, this criteria for either your student group or your school overall is not available as criteria for your determinations. We need to be able to see a performance level, performance color on your dashboard in order to make that decision. So if you see any gray dials, it's because of this reason. A really important component of this is that for foster and homeless students, we have a special rule on the dashboard, and it comes straight from Ed Code. But districts receive colors for homeless and foster youth if they have at least 15 students in the current or prior year. So not 30, but 15. However, for charter schools, we treat charter schools like schools. So therefore, you do not have the lower N size that some districts have at 15. Instead, your N size remains 30 across all of your indicators. Now, some folks have said this is confusing. However, it's very confusing for the poor districts. They're the ones that have to go through and see that, at their schools, they don't have per se a homeless or foster youth number. But when you get to their district, they do have one coming through. For you, you have one N size across all of your indicators to remember, 30 in the current year and 30 in the prior year. I want to point this out because as we onboard in the next year, we'll be adding a 14th student group to the dashboard, long-term English learners. And this same rule applies for them as well. So for districts, they'll be held accountable at 15 students and receive colors if they have 15 students in the current or prior year. For charter schools, this will also be 30 students in the current year and 30 students in the prior year. Now, if you have fewer than 11 students overall, you are not going to see any information displayed about performance in any way on the dashboard. You will not see a status. You will not see a change. You will not see a status level or change level in our data files. And you will not be held accountable in any way, shape, or form for any of these indicators with fewer than 11 students. However, you will see the number of students displayed on the card. And the reason for that is so that you know why you're not seeing it. And you'll see the number of students in the current year displayed. So in this case, for this homeless group, there were 8 students available in the current year. And so therefore, with less than 11 students, the data is not displayed for privacy. Now, all of that dashboard explanation comes to exactly this. What is the dashboard really used for? Well, over time, the dashboard, again, was initially set up for LCFF to be our state and federal accountability system. And holistically, the entire dashboard is set up to promote continuous improvement across all of our student groups. And so that's why we emphasize a lot of importance around the data that's provided for our student groups. And over time, since 2017, others have adopted using the dashboard and the data available on the dashboard for their purposes. So for instance, Distinguished Schools utilizes data on the dashboard in order to provide exactly, the categorizations for schools that qualify for the Distinguished Schools Award. Blue Ribbon Schools use information from the dashboard as their criteria for their awards. We've seen grant applications require you to speak to how the dashboard outcomes come. I just received a private inquiry from a developer and talking about how they needed to report if any of the schools and their developments for low-income housing had great outcomes on their state accountability system. So there's a lot of opportunities where the dashboard has been utilized to be able to provide a consistent message of validity and reliability and comparison across the state as to outcomes on all of our metrics that the state board has adopted for use on the dashboard. And charter school renewal is the latest of those to be added to this bundle of criteria. So AB 1505 passed and effective on July 1st, 2020. Charter schools received a performance category based on their dashboard performance over the past 2 years. And all of the information was detailed within that legislation. The first designations that we released were in 2020, and they were based on the 2019 and 2018 dashboards. The 3 categories of performance that are outlined within through the AB 1505 performance category designations are as follows. The high category allows for a charter school to be eligible for a 5, 6, or 7-year renewal term. The middle category allows charter schools that they may be renewed for a 5-year term. And the low category allows for charter schools that may be renewed for a 2-year term only if they meet criteria and conditions under additional education code. Now, let's walk through for 2024 how these performance categories were determined and what those outcomes were. For your AB 1505 performance category determinations, there are 2 pathways to receiving a performance category. The first is criterion 1, and that involves the overall colors on your dashboard at your overall school level. And I say overall because sometimes, again, we talk about student group performance and what's going on. This is the front page of your dashboard and those initial colors that you see. The second path to a performance category is criterion 2. So if a charter school does not receive a high or low performance category under criterion 1, they can be considered under criterion 2. And that involves your overall status on your dashboard for your academic indicators across your school level and student group levels. And when we speak to status, we're speaking to that value and number that we see in that blue box on the dashboard across each of your indicators. So let's walk it through in detail exactly what that means. So first off, for criterion 1, in order to be evaluated under this criterion, you first need to meet one condition, and that condition is that you need 2 or more academic indicators with a school level color in both years. So our academic indicators on the dashboard are the first ones you see, And those are English Language Arts Academic, Math Academic, the College Career Indicator, or CCI, and the English Learner Progress Indicator, or the LP. In order to meet the high criterion 1 level, you need to have blue and green on all school indicators in both years. And some of the questions we've received talked about, what does this look like on a dashboard? So I provided a fuzzy picture. What you're going to see here at the top is what you would see in 2023, and that's when colors were on the dashboard. It looks like blue and green across all of those indicators. And in this instance for college and career, it was a very high. So our cell phone bar status levels allow us to see exactly where you scored on this matrix as well. So here you could see 5 cell phone bars filled in. 5 is equivalent as a proxy measurement to a blue on a status only dashboard. At the bottom there with all of those cell phone bars and purple all across is what the dashboard looked like in 2022 when we were not allowed to use colors due to the suspension of the dashboard in the prior years. And what we're looking for here are 4 bars or 5 bars colored in across the dashboard. Again, our proxy measurements for green and our proxy measurements for blue. So in looking at this overall for one school, we would be able to see that this school qualified for criterion 1 high. For criterion 1 low, we're looking for the opposite spectrum. We're looking for red or orange on all school indicators in both years. So what does this look like? Once again, we're looking at overall performance. We need to have 2 academic indicators available on both years at the dashboard. And we're going to look at overall performance in 2023, and we're looking for reds and oranges. And then on 2022, we're looking for 1 cell phone bar filled in or 2 cell phone bars filled in, which are our proxy measurements for red and orange. So here you can see that on this school, which didn't have as many indicators as the prior school that we saw, they would qualify under criterion 1 low performing. For 2024, we have a total of 11 schools who qualified for either high or low on criterion 1. The high category, we had 9 schools that are identified on the list this year. And for the low category in the file, we have 2 schools. After those 11 schools have been identified and taken out with their performance categories, we still have 1,138 charter schools to move on to consideration for criterion 2. The eligibility conditions for criterion 2 look similar, but they have an additional caveat. So that same condition comes into play that you need 2 or more academic indicators with a school color in both years. And additionally, you need 2 eligible student groups with a color as well. And the reason we say eligible student groups is because for criterion 2, we're looking at historically underperforming student group performance. And therefore, we need to remove student groups that have been performing above the state average. And in 2024, the student groups that have been removed from consideration under criterion 2 are the white, Asian, 2 or more races, and Filipino student groups. In order to meet criterion 2 high, you need to have a school status higher or the same than the state for all indicators in both years. And you also need to have a majority of student groups with a status higher than the state for the academic indicator in both years. For low, we just flip that around and it becomes the school status is lower or the same than the state for all academic indicators in both years, and a majority of your student groups with a status lower than the state for academic indicators in both years. With this expanded criteria, we're able to see a few more schools qualify. Now, I wanted to point out within the slide deck exactly what the status was for 2022 that you'd be compared against for the state for your academic indicators, as well as 2023. So here you can see what the academic indicators look like on the dashboard overall at the state in 2022. So it would be having a status higher or lower than 12.2 points below standard for English language arts, 51.7 points below standard for mathematics, higher or lower than 50.3% of students making progress towards English language proficiency on the LP. And on the college career indicator, there was not a reporting happening in 2022. So we only look at 2023. Additionally, you need to look and see what the student group, what the status is for each student group for each one of these indicators. I've included one, and you can easily find all of the others as well. But this is for English language arts, for example. So here you can see in 2022 what the status was for the state across all of those student groups and what you would need to show being higher or lower than for those qualified student groups. In 2023, we have the state status for academic indicators as 13.6 points below standard for English language arts, 49.1 points below standard for mathematics, 48.7% of students making progress on the English learner progress metric. And for the college career indicator, the state average is 43.9% prepared. And again, you can go through and check in for the status for each of these student groups as well. Here you see ELA displayed. There's a few more columns added to our table. This is a table that's available in our additional reports. And you'll be able to compare how a student group did compared to the state average as well. For our 2024 performance categories under Criterion 2, we had 201 qualify for the high category and 95 schools qualify for the low category. That leaves the other school designations that have not been identified either for high or low under Criterion 1 or Criterion 2 to be placed in the middle category. 601 of those schools did not meet the criteria to qualify either under Criterion 1 or Criterion 2. But of those 842, 241 of them did not have the necessary data to actually be evaluated or just for a consideration under Criterion 1 or 2. So when we think back to our grade dials and we think about having 30 students to create a color in the current and prior year for the dashboard, when we think about our academic indicators and that they test and assess students in grades 3 through 8 and 11, and that our college career indicator only tests, right, only captures students in a cohort that you need 12th graders for, and that our English learner progress indicator also requires having 30 students. If those metrics do not have colors on your overall school dashboard, and you do not have 2 of them, you are not eligible for consideration under Criterion 1 or Criterion 2. And additionally, if you have those colors and don't meet the bar for Criterion 1, but you do not have any eligible student groups to be considered for Criterion 2, then that is unavailable to be measured as well. So this year, there are 241 of those schools that meet the middle category for being unable to be considered for either high or low under Criterion 1 or 2. Now, I want to close out my presentation today by walking you through an immense amount of resources that we have on the dashboard, because this is exactly where you want to go when you start thinking about why, how do I have a color? What does that color mean? How did I get that color? And will I get that color next year? The first place to start for all of our resources is our dashboard resources websites. And we have dedicated pages for each state indicator on our dashboard websites. And they're organized by technical information as well as very general information. And this is where you can download all of the files for each of our indicators as well as file layouts to see how all schools, districts, and student groups across the state performed on each of these indicators. The easiest way I know to get to each of these pages is opening up a search bar, choose Bing, choose Google, or whatever else you'd like, Chat GPT perhaps, and just simply enter in CDE indicator by the name. So if I enter in CDE chronic absenteeism indicator, this page will pop to the very top and you'll be able to click through and find all of the information you've ever wanted about chronic absenteeism, including the most up-to-date frequently asked questions that we receive from the field on a daily basis. Additionally, each year we publish a toolkit in August that pertains to the upcoming dashboard release. We create multiple flyers for both general audiences and a parent audience at your schools. Those are all translated into the top 7 languages, as well as more in-depth indicator flyers that sometimes range from 4 to 5 pages and walk you through all of the details around each of those indicators or determinations. We also have YouTube on-demand tutorials where you can dive into the nitty-gritty of each of our indicators and see exactly how we calculate things to the nth degree. And goodness gracious, there's some very detailed things in those webinars. So they're available on demand. You can link to them at any time, and they're all on YouTube. We also have additional frequently asked questions pertaining to the upcoming release. And this toolkit, again, is updated every August prior to the release of the upcoming dashboard. So while you can have all these resources for our currently published 2023 dashboard, in just a few months, you'll be able to see all of the resources for the next dashboard that gets published on November 22nd. These are some of those flyers that I talked about. So we have flyers for each of our indicators, as well as our participation rate for both the academic indicators and the English learner progress indicator. When we talk about our flyers for our parents, and these are the ones that are translated, it talks about getting to know the state measures, how those dashboard colors are determined, how to compare schools on the dashboard, and how to explore the equity report as well. So these are wonderful tools if this is information that would help you communicate and speak to your performance categories or anything within your renewal process. And if you really want to dive deep, deep down into the bowels of accountability, we have 2 very strong resources for you to reference. They are our technical guides, and they're broken down by subject, but it really walks you through all of the steps that we've taken to be able to calculate each of these indicators. And then we also have a wonderful resource for any of your CalPads folks at your school sites, which is, we call it the handbook, and it connects the CalPads to the dashboard. And you'll actually be able to see how you can go into CalPads in the middle of the summer as you're preparing for your end of year reports, and you'll be able to see what you're going to get for your suspension rate and for your chronic absenteeism rate on the dashboard months later, because all of that information is available to see within the reports on CalPads once you've submitted the data. So it's an amazing resource for you to be able to look at and plan and speak to folks, especially if you've had some issues with entering in data or having the proper data reflected back at you on the dashboard. It's a great resource for your entire data community to be aware of and to frequently check each year when it gets updated. And then finally, I snipped a couple of those pictures today when we're talking about those status outcomes from our additional reports page. We have created immense resources specific to all of the resources on the dashboard for LEAs and for schools. Folks have asked us to see things squished in different ways. How can I see exactly which square I landed on in the dashboard to get an orange, to get a yellow, to get a green? We have created over 16 different additional reports that answer all of those questions from the field. And they're far too nitty-gritty to be putting on our main page for the dashboard, but they are available and linked in the upper corner. You can just click and see view additional reports, and it will take you to this page. You can also search for additional reports on our CDE website. And again, our search bar is very kind to us. If you put in CDE additional reports, for the dashboard, it will take you to that page as well. So finally, I want to leave off real quick, and you can see the first one is if you have any questions about which performance category that you've landed in, and I'm sure Rick will cover this as well, you're going to want to email charters@cde.ca.gov. However, if you have any questions at all about the colors and the determinations that you have for your performance levels on the dashboard itself. And please do not feel bad about reaching out about 2022 data or prior years. We're here to help you understand why the dashboard is reflecting what it's reflecting. And we want to make sure you understand that as well. Please email any and all of those questions to dashboard@cde.ca.gov. And with that, I'm going to switch it over to Rick to go through the rest of today's presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, Kim. I know the dashboard work is a lot of labor, and I always have really appreciated the materials you put together that I know help me understand the very complicated process a lot better. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rick Reyes from the CDE's Charter Schools Division. And we haven't had the full charter renewal process before with the performance categories. And so I'll be taking us through a brief look at the new-ish renewal process. So I'll be covering an overview of the charter school renewal process as it's laid out in Education Code and the renewal process for each renewal track that align with the performance categories. I'll talk a little bit about opportunities for charter school appeals, including the State Board of Education meetings and deadlines, and some additional resources that are available online. A few things that I will not be covering today are the renewal process for charter schools with DOS, or Dashboard Alternative School Status. You can look at Education Code section 47607C7 for more information on DOS renewals. And I will not be covering charter schools currently authorized by the State Board of Education. That's such a small subset of charter schools in California, but if you are interested, you can look at Education Code section 47605.9 for that information. So looking at the Education Code that covers charter school renewals, I want to first give a caution when looking up Education Code or any California code for that matter. There are a lot of third-party websites out there that catalog California law, but many of them are not updated regularly. So if you use them, you may not be getting the most up-to-date statutes. I recommend always using the California legislature's own site, LegInfo, at leginfo.legislature.ca.gov. That site is updated continuously, so you'll be sure to get the most current and accurate information there. So there are two sections of Education Code that cover nearly all charter school renewals. Like I said, DOS and State Board renewals are not included here. Section 47607 for charter schools in the high renewal track, and section 47607.2 for charter schools in the low and middle renewal tracks. These two sections do have additional information about renewals in general, so it is a good idea to be familiar with the full text of both. And though 47607 and 47607.2 are the sections that outline renewal criteria for each renewal track, statute in section 47607 does state that renewals are subject to the standards and criteria of Education Code section 47605, which covers establishment of charter schools and the requirements of charter petitions. So even though we're looking at the 7 and the 7.2 for renewals, we don't get to fully leave behind 47605. As Kim went over already, the Education Code lays out 3 different tracks for renewals. And these processes vary based on the school's dashboard data from the last 2 years. As was explained, based on the dashboard data for overall school performance and the performance of specific student groups, the statute sorts charter schools into a high, middle, or low track. And for our purposes today, we are talking about renewals for charter schools whose term ends June 30th, 2025. And now we'll take a look at each of the three tracks. First, the high renewal track. As mentioned before, there are 210 charter schools that met their criteria for this track, which is about 18.3% of all charter schools in the state. You can think of this track as the shall not deny track, since that's the phrase used in statute. These charter schools are eligible for terms of 5 to 7 years, and they are only required to update their petition to include any new requirements enacted under state law. Under law. It could be federal law also. Authorizers can deny renewal for a charter school in the high renewal track according to Education Code section 47607E, which does require a 30-day notice of violation and an opportunity for the charter school to cure the violation. For the middle renewal track, there are 842 charter schools, which is about 73.3% of all charter schools in the state. For schools in this track, authorizers must consider a few things. They must consider the dashboard data, both school-wide and for student groups, giving greater weight to the academic indicators, which are ELA, Math, LP, and CCI. And they are required to consider clear and consistent evidence demonstrated by verified data of either measurable increases in academic achievement or strong post-secondary outcomes. If you're not familiar with the term verified data, the state board has approved a list of data sources that are considered verified data and therefore serve as the source of verified data for the purposes of charter school renewal. And you can find that list on the CDE website using the search function verified data. I do want to point out there is some proposed legislation that you may want to keep an eye on. Current statute has the verified data component set to sunset in a few years, and it states that the authorizer shall consider it. There is Assembly Bill 2254 put forth by Assemblymember Rubio, which proposes to remove the sunset of verified data and also adds the phrase, if provided by the charter school, to the shall consider clause. So the authorizer would only be required to consider the verified data if the charter school provided it. So that's one to keep an eye on to see if any changes are made before your renewal. Charter schools in the middle track are eligible for a 5-year term. Petitioners are subject to all the standards and criteria set forth in Education Code section 47605. And authorizers may deny renewal to charter schools in this track in accordance with Education Code 47607E, which I mentioned before, or 47607.2B6. For the low renewal track, there are 97 charter schools, which is about 8.4% of all charter schools in the state. This track's statute uses the phrase shall not renew, and then a little bit later, may renew only if. So in order to renew a charter school in this track, the authorizer must find that the charter school is taking meaningful steps to address the underlying cause or causes of low performance, and that there is clear and consistent evidence demonstrated again by verified data of either measurable increases in academic achievement, which is stated as 1 year's progress for each year in school, or strong post-secondary outcomes such as college enrollment, persistence, and completion rates. If the authorizer does make these findings, they are required to publish written findings supported by specific facts. If renewed, charter schools in this track may be renewed for a term of 2 years. The petitioner is subject to all the standards and criteria set forth in Education Code Section 47605. And as cause for denial, as I previously stated, this is the shall not renew track. So this subdivision of Education Code does not give criteria for denying the renewal. It instead gives the requirements that must be met in order to renew the charter. As you may know, Education Code Section 47605 now allows authorizers to consider the community and fiscal impact when reviewing a petition for a new charter school. These findings may not be used to deny renewal of an existing charter. However, these statutes may be used to deny a material revision for proposed expansion, but these statutes would be limited to consideration only of the impact of the proposed material revision, not the renewal as a whole. In the event a charter school's renewal petition is denied, the charter school has a few options for appeal. If denied by the district, the charter school may submit their petition to the county within 30 days of the district's denial. And in accordance with Education Code 47605C, the county will review the charter school's petition, what's often called as a de novo review, which means as new or from the beginning. The county will evaluate the charter school petition essentially as if it had not been reviewed and denied by the district. If denied by the county, the charter school may submit to the State Board of Education within 30 days of the county's denial. This is a different review. In accordance with Education Code 47605K2, this would be an abuse of discretion review, which is much narrower. In these appeals, the charter school petitioner must show that both the district and the county abused their discretion in denying the charter school renewal. If you would like to look into past abuse of discretion appeals, those materials can be found on the State Board of Education website. And really, this applies to the entire renewal process, but especially if you are facing an appeal or submitting an appeal, we recommend you consult your legal counsel. Here are some upcoming deadlines for submitting appeals to the state board. Most charter school renewals taking place in the next year would come after July of this year. And so while we don't have those deadlines set yet, the State Board of Education meetings have been posted and they take place in the odd numbered months. And deadlines for appeal submissions run about 4 months in advance. So for example, if you were thinking that you wanted to have your appeal heard by the state board in May of 2025, you would need to count back about 4 months. And then you would know that you would be needing to submit your appeal by January sometime. But again, it also must be submitted within 30 days of the county denial. Once these deadlines have been set, they'll be posted on the CDE website. The URL is listed there. Here are some additional resources available on the CDE website that you may find useful. You can take a screenshot of these URLs, or as Kim said, just use a search engine or the search feature on the CDE website itself. A few resources of note that I'd like to point out. There is a flyer titled Determining Charter School Performance Categories, which is a very detailed step-by-step process for how those categories are determined. There is a page for charter school renewals, a page talking about verified data and listing all of the approved sources, and then a page laying out the information for state board appeals. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. If you have any questions about the dashboard, as Kim has said, you can contact her team in the accountability office at dashboard@cde.ca.gov. If you have questions about charter schools, the performance categories, renewals, or appeals, or anything else related to charter schools, you can contact the Charter Schools Division at charters@cde.ca.gov. And if you are not sure whether your question is for the Accountability Office or the Charter Schools Division, go ahead and email us in the Charter Schools Division, and we will make sure to connect you with the CDE staff that is best suited to address your question. And this concludes our webinar on charter school performance categories and renewals. Thank you very much for joining us. This will be posted online at a later date, and have a great rest of your day.